The cost of not putting forth an opinion and not being assertive is usually a long-term cost in your role where your execution is slightly less sophisticated, your leadership is slightly less strong, and your path to promotion is slowed down. When you get good at taking action, despite the fear of judgment, what happens is, over time, those actions lead you to create more success.
Welcome to The Art of Speaking Up, a podcast that helps professional women access the limitless potential that lies within them. I'm your host, Jessica Guzik, and my mission is to help you find that spark inside you that has the power to transform your career in ways you may not have thought possible. I'm so excited that you're here. And now, on to the show.
Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to The Art of Speaking Up. If you are new here, welcome to the show. My name is Jess. I am the host and creator of the Art of Speaking Up podcast. I'm a New York Times featured podcast host, a prior corporate executive, and at the moment, I am a coach for women in the corporate and 9-to-5 space. I help women thrive in their 9-to-5 roles, ascend into leadership, find their voice, build confidence, and achieve success in the corporate world in a way that feels really good and really authentic to who they are. And in today's episode, this is part 2 of a series that I'm doing on assertiveness and developing an assertive communication style. And in this series, I'm talking through the different obstacles that get in the way and that I see preventing women from finding a voice that is both assertive and also authentic to who they are. Now, in part 1, I talked about why being assertive and why having a strong voice in the room is so critical for your career. And I will reiterate that briefly on today's episode, but I won't go too deep into it because I already talked about it in part 1. But what I gave an overview of and what I'll just kind of recap really quickly is that when you are not being assertive, your boss and leaders at your company don't see you stepping up and leading. And if they're going to give you more responsibility, they need to know that if you're working on something and you're in the room, you're going to push it forward. You're going to fight for what's best for the company. And if they don't see you being assertive and having that determination and having that strong voice in the room, they don't know if you will be able to do that. So when you're in the room with your boss is going to assume that however you're acting when you're in the room with them is how you're going to act when you're not in the room with them. So if you're in meetings with your boss and you get quiet and you're not being assertive because you're thinking, well, my boss is in the room and they know more than me and I'll let them take the lead and I don't want to disrespect the hierarchy. If you get into that kind of situation, the problem is your boss doesn't see you stepping up. So it doesn't build confidence in them that if they're not in the room, you will be able to handle it and you will be able to be assertive and lead. So you really need to show your boss that you are capable of stepping into leadership by doing that in front of them. And that is why there is such a strong correlation between how assertive you are and how quickly you advance and get promoted in your career. So having an assertive voice speeds up your path to promotion by showing your boss that you are 100% capable of moving things forward and being a strong presence in the room, whether they're there or not. So they know that you don't always have to lean on them to take the lead. And not only that, but assertiveness helps you have a bigger impact in your role and it helps you get more done. It helps you be more effective. It helps you deliver higher quality work. It literally helps with everything. It is such a valuable communication skill. And yet, if you struggle with it, you're really not alone. So many women struggle with it. And I'm breaking down the reasons why and helping you overcome those struggles. So in part 1, I talked about the struggle of being afraid that if you're going to be more assertive, you're going to be less authentic and you're going to have to communicate aggressively. And you're going to have to communicate in a way that doesn't feel good to you and a way that doesn't feel authentic to you. And in part one of this series, I broke down why that's not true at all. Assertiveness is not about being aggressive and it's not about speaking like someone you're not. And if you want to dive deeper into that, definitely listen to part one because it is going to change the way that you think about assertiveness, and you're going to see it's not just about being domineering and aggressive. Now, in part two, I am talking about a really big psychological challenge that all of us face as humans and that you probably are facing or have faced in your quest to develop a more assertive communication style. And that is the fear of being judged. The fear that your assertiveness will cause other people to have critical or judgmental thoughts about you. And fear of judgment is a really difficult mindset obstacle. It's a really difficult psychological obstacle that will come up in so many different places in your career. But assertiveness in particular can activate that fear of being judged by others because by definition, assertiveness means taking up more space. Because it means not only are you contributing in the conversation, but you're contributing in a strong way, in a definitive way. Assertiveness means you have a point of view, you have a perspective, and you are there to share it. So when you're there to share a perspective, you're automatically putting yourself under greater scrutiny than if you don't have a perspective to share. So it makes total sense then that the thought of being more assertive would trigger that fear of judgment. And for a lot of the women that I work with, they have this fear of judgment around a few different areas. So you might be afraid that if you start to be more assertive, people are going to judge you and think you're weird because you're acting differently, because you've been acting one way your entire career. And now all of a sudden you're more vocal, you're speaking up more, you're acting different, and people might have judgmental thoughts about you because of that change in how you're acting, how you're speaking, and how you're showing up. That's a really common one. Another one that people are afraid of is they're afraid that if they're going to be more assertive and they're going to share more thoughts, people are going to judge the quality of what they're sharing. People are going to think that what they're sharing isn't smart enough. People are going to be unimpressed by it. People are going to see that they're not super sophisticated and that they don't really understand what they're talking about. So when you're being assertive, you're giving someone a direct line of sight into your thinking, into your mind, into your problem solving. So when you show people your thinking, you show people what's on your mind, you put it out there for people to be exposed to, naturally, they're going to have thoughts about it. They're going to have thoughts about those contributions that you previously weren't sharing with people. So of course, it makes sense that you'd be afraid of judgment because it's like showing someone the inside of your house for the first time ever when that person has only seen the outside of your house. If you haven't been assertive, it's as if people don't know what's inside your house, or in this case, what's inside your mind. You're showing that. You don't know what they think. You don't know if they're going to like it. So of course, it would make sense that you would be scared and that you would be asking yourself, what if they don't like it? What if they think it's not impressive? Another area that people are afraid they'll be judged in is people are afraid that they'll get some sort of reaction from other people along the lines of like, who does she think she is? Who is she to contribute in this room? Who is she to be sharing this? They feel like there might be some judgment around them stepping up or having a voice in a room when they shouldn't, or them being really confident in something and that turning out to be incorrect or just unimpressive. So people are scared that as they're more assertive, it will elicit that response from their audience of who does she think she is? So all of these different fears that people will judge you for acting differently, fears that people will finally see your thinking and they won't be impressed by it, fears that people will have thoughts of who does she think she is. All of those fears are different forms of the fear of judgment, fear of what your audience will think of you as you are more assertive. And those are all fears that prevent people from asserting their opinion and having a strong voice in the room. Now, there's a cost, right? So when you avoid fear of judgment and you don't have to deal with the scariness of what are people going to think of this, on the one hand, you avoid the scariness, and that's kind of the reward that your brain is seeking. That's like the instant gratification of, I don't have to feel judged in this moment. But on the other hand, there's a cost. And what's so tricky about the fear of judgment is that the reward you get is instant. You get that reward in the moment because you don't have to deal with the vulnerability of feeling that fear of judgment. So if you abstain from being assertive, if you're quiet, if you keep your thoughts to yourself, if you go into wallflower mode, if you do those things, you get an instant reward, which is that you don't have to face the fear of judgment. Now, the problem and why this can be so tricky is that the cost of this, the cost of not being assertive, the cost of not showing your perspective is usually not as instant as the reward. So the cost of not putting forth an opinion and not being assertive is usually a long-term cost in your role where your execution is slightly less sophisticated, your leadership is slightly less strong, and your path to promotion is slowed down. The problem is those are not costs that you experience in the moment in that exact meeting. So it's not like you go into a meeting and you're quiet and you don't say anything, and then the meeting ends and your boss says, hey, you're not going to get a promotion next cycle because you weren't being assertive in that meeting. That's not going to happen, right? You're not going to find out about the impacts of not being assertive until much later. And so the problem is then, because the reward is instant, and because when you avoid assertiveness, you instantly get to avoid the fear of judgment, which feels great, which feels amazing. You don't have to deal with that. What happens then is it always becomes easier to hide. It always becomes easier to not be assertive and to avoid the fear of judgment because you get the reward instantly. And in the moment, it seems like there's no cost to it. In the moment, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of downside, but there is downside. The downside just shows itself over longer periods of time. And the downsides are the things that I talked about, right? So not having as high an impact on the work that you do, not demonstrating as much leadership, getting promoted more slowly. It has a cumulative impact on your execution and on your reputation. But when you don't see that impact in the moment, it is much harder to step up and use your voice because we are always going to want that instant gratification. So that's something that makes assertiveness very difficult, which means that if you care about your career and you really want to work through this and you want to develop that strong, badass, unstoppable leadership voice, you have to recognize that in the moment, it's going to feel like you're making a bad decision when you are more assertive and you put your opinion out there and you face the fear of being judged. It's going to feel to your brain like you're making a terrible decision because your brain's going to be like, why are you doing this? Why are you saying this thing? Why are you embarrassing yourself when you literally don't have to? Why would you not just be quiet? Why are you doing this crazy thing that's subjecting you to the judgment of other people? Your brain is going to focus on the short term. And when you focus on the short term, it looks like the wise, correct decision is to refrain, to not share your thoughts, to not put yourself at risk in that way. So it's very important for you to be hyper aware of the long-term consequences and ask yourself, am I comfortable reinforcing a communication style that is going to reduce my overall impact in the work that I do, that is going to slow my growth as a leader, that is not going to help me grow my confidence, and that is going to slow my path to promotion? Because every time you abstain from being assertiveness because of the fear of judgment, you are creating those negative outcomes. And when you can see that, and when you can see that there actually is a cost to staying quiet, you become more willing to face the discomfort. So I share this with you because I don't want you to get trapped in your brain's bias to make decisions that create instant gratification. You will get that instant gratification of, I don't have to be judged, I get to keep quiet. And when you speak up more and become more assertive, what's going to happen is your brain's going to say, why are you doing this? This is so silly. You could just stay quiet. And you have to remind yourself, yes, I could just stay quiet and I could avoid the fear of judgment, but there's a cost to that. There's a cost to that too, just like there's a cost to me being more assertive and me experiencing the scariness of that. So that's something foundational that I wanted to share with you. And I want to go deeper into this because I think that fear of judgment is really misunderstood. And I think in the self-help world, especially, I find that it is talked about in a way that is not useful. So when it comes to the fear of judgment, a lot of the predominant wisdom that people will share is, oh, don't be afraid of people judging you. People aren't thinking about you as much as you think. They're thinking about themselves. They're not really judging you in the way that you imagine they're judging you. And while I do think this is true, and while I think for most humans, our mind is mostly occupied with us and we aren't obsessing about other people the way we're obsessing about ourselves, while I think that's true, I think it can be a bit dismissive of the very real human experience of wanting to be accepted and wanting to be liked and wanting to belong. And the human desire to be accepted and to be liked and to belong is something that is wired into us at a very primitive level. For us, we associate belonging and being liked and being a part of something bigger than ourselves. We associate that with survival. Our brain makes a direct association between acceptance and belonging and survival. And even though that association isn't always accurate, and even though if, we don't belong or people are judging us, even though that might not mean that we're going to die and that our survival is at risk, we still experience that on an emotional level because our brain and the way it works isn't always based on what's rational and isn't always based on the logic of reality. This is why the fear of judgment can feel so debilitating because it feels like something very, very terrible will happen if we are judged, when in fact, often when we are judged, the outcome is not nearly as terrible as we imagine it might be. However, our brains are wired to present the fear of judgment to us as something that is very dangerous and something that must be avoided at all costs. So rather than pretending that we don't have an urge to belong, and rather than pretending that we don't experience the fear of judgment, I think it's much more productive and useful to accept that we do experience it. Because when we pretend like we don't experience it, and when we say no one's judging you, just go do the thing, then what happens is what we're saying at a more subtle level is can't you just get over this feeling? Oh, you think people are judging you? They're not. Just get over it and just do the thing. But we're not acknowledging that it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to feel the fear of judgment. We are wired to care what other people think about us. We are wired for connections. So why should we pretend like we're not feeling that way? Why don't we instead acknowledge how we're feeling and learn to work with it and learn to become more flexible and adaptable in the face of it? I don't know about you, but I don't want to divorce myself from caring about what other people think about me, because the fact that I care that other people think about me is a symptom of my empathy. It's a symptom of me being connected to my own messy humanness, my own vulnerability. I don't just want to turn off that part of myself. What I want to do instead is I want to have a healthy relationship with that part of myself, where I acknowledge that I will probably experience some form of the fear of judgment for my entire life. How do I work with it and function alongside it so that it doesn't take over my life? That's how I think about fear of judgment. And it's not that your fear of judgment won't reduce over time. There might be things that you're really scared of being judged for. And as your confidence grows, you won't be as scared. But I think on the whole, trying to get to a point where we quote unquote don't care what other people think, I think that's a very silly goal, It's very reductive. It treats us as much more robotic and much less emotional than we actually are as humans. So I prefer to look at it as fearing what other people think and caring about what other people think about me is always going to be a part of my human experience. It will certainly ebb and flow in terms of how scared I am and how much I fear other people's judgments. But I don't think I will, and I don't actually aspire to get to a point where I don't care what other people think about me. That seems like a very odd, robotic, disconnected, not super emotionally mature goal. I would rather be someone who can acknowledge and hold the complexity of my human experience and who can acknowledge the fact that I do have feelings when someone judges me and who can move forward really freaking powerfully in spite of that. Because what I really want to share with you is rather than eliminating the fear of judgment, I think a much more productive goal is to learn not to let the fear of judgment prevent you from making bold decisions. There is a difference between saying, I'm afraid that people will judge me, therefore I'm going to hide so that they don't judge me, versus saying, I'm afraid that people will judge me and I'm going to take this scary action that might elicit judgment anyway, because showing up strong and being a leader and standing out in my work environment and building a career that I'm proud of is more important to me. That priority of me showing up as my most confident self, operating as a leader, being bold and courageous, and taking actions that move my career forward, that to me is more important than avoiding the fear of judgment. I would rather take actions that get me that promotion 6 months sooner or 12 months sooner. And I would rather take actions that have me making a bigger impact in my job than me avoiding any possible instances of someone thinking something judgmental about me. I'm okay with risking being judged because my career is much more important to me than avoiding being judged. There's a trade-off there, and it is so helpful to get clear on the trade-off. What is more important? Is it more important that you experience the growth you want, the promotions you want, and that you have the impact that you want to have in your role? Or is it more important that Bob or Susie or Chad or Timothy never has a critical thought about you? You have to make that decision. And what I want to offer you and what I want to share with you is that when it came to my mindset work and my own growth, the fear of judgment was the hardest thing for me to let go of. It was the most stubborn mindset obstacle that I experienced. And I clung on so tight to this fantasy that I would somehow find a way to have a really big impact and show up big and never subject myself to anyone's judgment. And what I found through clinging tightly to that fantasy and then eventually letting go of it is I found that there's no way to maximize your impact and to maximize one's leadership if in the back of your mind, you are always prioritizing avoiding people judging you. I really want you to think about, I want you to imagine that the CEO of your company spends every waking minute of their day worrying about what people think about them. I want you to think about how that would affect their decision-making, how that would affect their performance, how it would affect their ability to run the company. When the fear of judgment and the desire to avoid being judged takes up a ton of space in our minds, we do not have enough focus left over to think about having an impact and to think about problem solving and to think about doing our jobs well and to think about showing up as the strongest possible leaders we can be. It distracts us from doing our deepest, strongest, highest impact work in the world, period. And it distracts us from doing it whether our audience is judging us or not, like whether our fear of being judged is rooted in reality or not, it doesn't matter when we're focused on it and when it's guiding our decisions and it's taking up a lot of our brain space. It detracts from our highest potential, our highest performance, and our most successful and exciting career path. That is just a fact because you're prioritizing a whole extra thing, right? Like I really want you to think about it as like we can only prioritize so many things. So if your career is a priority for you and then something else happens in your life that becomes a competing priority, that's going to detract from your career, right? Anytime you have a competing priority in life, in any situation, competing priorities slow you down. And the fear of judgment is a competing priority because what it says is, oh shoot, when I'm making decisions, in addition to accounting for like what actually helps me perform well in my role and what actually gets me promoted, I also have to account for this fear of judgment and adjust my decisions based on that. So it causes you to lose focus and lose determination. Now, lucky for you, you get to decide if you want that pattern to continue or if you want to start getting really good at spotting that pattern and putting an end to it and get really good at tolerating the fear of being judged. Because whether your audience is judging you or not, your brain will fear judgment. It's just something we experience as humans. So you get to decide, do I want to learn to tolerate that feeling more so that I can take powerful action? Or do I want to avoid that feeling and not take powerful action? You get to make that decision and you get to practice doing that. Now, what's really cool is when you get good at taking action, even though you are afraid that people will judge you for taking said action. So in this case, even though you are afraid people will be judgmental of the things you say and the way that you assert yourself, when you get good at taking action despite the fear of judgment, what happens is over time, those actions lead you to create more success. As you use your voice more, as you are more assertive, as you start to make choices, not based on avoiding fear of judgment, but based on having an impact, as you do that, your success will compound. And as you watch your success compound, you will feel really, really good. And your brain will start to associate assertiveness, not just with being judged, but your brain will start to associate it with the good things that it creates in your life because you've been doing it enough to finally see the benefits. And I can assure you that when you are more assertive in your role and when you prioritize having an impact over avoiding fear of judgment, you will create better results for your company and you will be met with greater success. And you will see that the action that elicits potential judgment from your audience is the same action that grows your career and grows your self-confidence. And suddenly, it will start to become easier to take that action because you've seen that it's not all downside. It's not all just this terrifying experience of being judged, but that there's a whole lot of upside. Remember that bias I told you about? And remember how I told you that when you're not assertive, you get that instant gratification of not having experienced the fear of judgment, but then the costs of it, you don't necessarily see in the moment, but that they accumulate over time in the form of slower promotions and less impact in your role and slower leadership development. So as you are more assertive and as you have the courage to face that fear of judgment, that whole distorted decision-making starts to shift because what happens is the more assertive you are and the more you focus on impact and don't let fear of judgment cause you to make suboptimal decisions, the more that happens, the more your brain sees, oh, assertiveness leads to good things. And so when you're in those moments and you're experiencing the fear of judgment and you're like, oh, well, like just don't say anything because if you don't say anything, then you don't have to face this fear. your brain also knows, but like this is the reason that she's thriving. This is the reason she got promoted. This is the reason that she's firing on all cylinders in her role right now. Like, of course she's going to speak up. Of course you should use your voice because it's creating all of these incredible outcomes. So what's cool is that when you learn to be assertive, despite experiencing the fear of judgment, it becomes easier and easier to do that because you start to see the successes coming. And now what's so important is that the successes that you will experience as a result of being more assertive, they're not going to happen over a time period of one day or over a time period of one meeting. So it's really important to think about this in increments of months, 6 months, 12 months, right? I want you to think about where you want your impact to be, what you want your promotion status to be, what you want your career to be 6 to 12 months from now. And every meeting you're in is building towards that outcome if you are willing to face the fear of judgment. And then what happens is you will eventually attain that outcome and you will feel so motivated and so inspired to keep going. But you have to start with just the awareness of what you're choosing when you decide to be more assertive and what you're missing out on when you aren't being assertive because of the fear of judgment. And the last thing that I'll share about this, which is my personal favorite thing and which has helped me enormously in making decisions that I want to make and not allowing fear of judgment to dictate my career. What has helped me is to recognize that my ability and your ability to tolerate the fear of judgment makes you a badass. It makes you so strong. It makes you so resilient. It fundamentally changes who you are as a human. So if you want your confidence to grow and you want to feel totally unstoppable, one of the fastest ways to get there is to face the fear of judgment head on and to say to yourself, this is going to feel scary and this is going to make me really, really strong. If it feels this scary, imagine how much internal strength I am building as I face it. You are totally capable of doing this. And when you do it, you will be rewarded with a more satisfying, more lucrative career path. So this was part 2, which is the fear of judgment. And in part 3, I'm going to be talking about the fear of saying the wrong thing when you're being assertive, because that is another obstacle that comes up. And I have a lot of thoughts to share with you on that. So make sure that you tune into that episode. And if you're ready to get very serious about doing the inner work on yourself to find that assertive voice, to stop hiding, and to finally start speaking in a way that is going to help you get noticed and promoted in your career, I can help you with this in a much deeper capacity in my group coaching program, the Art of Speaking Up Academy. And I invite you to add yourself to the waitlist so that you are first to find out when a spot opens up in the next cohort. The waitlist always gets the first opportunity to join the next cohort, and most of the cohorts fill up. So if you know you want to do this program, and if you know that you want to experience the growth that comes from immersing yourself in a coaching program that is designed to motivate you and inspire you and help you believe in yourself, make sure you add yourself to the waitlist by heading over to jessguzikcoaching.com/academy or clicking the link in the show notes. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode, and I'll catch you in part 3 of this series. Bye.